With Pokemon Champions basically cementing the likes of Charizard Y, Sylveon, and Aerodactyl as some of the best Pokemon in the game, I've been wondering recently, what are the best Pokemon in every Pokemon game? I actually did a video on a topic like this last year where I talked about which Pokemon from each generation was the best in modern competitive Pokemon, but I want to explore which Pokemon was the best within their own generations with regard to the official format at the time. And man, I learned quite a bit researching this video. Of course, there was no VGC prior to Generation 4, but as it turns out, there was an official competitive format played in tournaments all the way back even in the 90s. So this should be a really fun one. Today, I'm talking about the very best Pokemon in each generation. Let's just get right into it. If you guys enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, check out the Patreon, become a YouTube channel member, hype the video, all of that. And hey, you definitely want to subscribe because at 300,000 subscribers, I'll be ranking every bench in Lumio City. Let's just begin. The official format of Generation 1 is obviously not VGC. Matter of fact, double battles didn't even exist until Generation 3, meaning, of course, we're looking at a single battle format. And while people may be disappointed as 6v6 singles has basically always been considered the default format of competitive Pokemon in the eyes of many fans, as it turns out, Pokemon had been using basically the Battle Spot singles rule set since the very beginning. Nintendo Cup 1997 was the official format of Generation 1, or at least the first one. It was followed by Nintendo Cup 1998, but all that format really did was additionally ban any Pokemon that won an official Nintendo Cup 1997 tournament, which I think is actually pretty hilarious considering how much that limited the pool of legal Pokemon. You're already starting off with such a small pool of Pokemon as it was Generation 1, and now you're banning anything that won a tournament the previous year. And since Nintendo Cup 1998 only banned Pokemon on the basis of them being good, then we're only going to be considering the 1997 format. This was a bring 6 pick 3 format, much like modern Battle Spot singles, but with some additional rules to help balance out Gen 1's admittedly wonky mechanics. Sleep Clause was a rule that stated that if a Pokemon on a person's team was asleep, then another one could not be put to sleep by their opponent. Self-KO Clause states that when you use Explosion or Self-Destruct with your final Pokemon, it's considered a forfeit, meaning that you can't win a match with those moves. And the final rule had to do with Pokemon's levels. This is the most interesting of all these rules, as Pokemon were not all limited to level 50, as they are in current VGC, and there was no system to force over-leveled Pokemon back down to level 50 if they were above that level. This would effectively mean that Dragonite would be banned as it evolves at level 55, but this rule allowed for Pokemon to be used between levels 50 and 55 as long as the total Pokemon brought to each match didn't have a combined level exceeding 155. I have to assume this was made specifically to make Dragonite legal. There's quite a few Pokemon that can boast high viability in Nintendo Cup 1997, including Articuno, Starmie, and even Jinx. But the best of the Pokemon in this format is typically considered to be Tauros. Tauros is a strong Pokemon in Generation 1 for a wide variety of reasons, but the three basic points are its high speed, great attack, and access to a reasonable special stat, meaning that it can use moves like Blizzard for coverage. But its greatest tool was its access to Stab Hyper Beam. Hyper Beam is a super powerful normal type move which was physical in Generation 1 as all normal type moves were. Typically, using Hyper Beam would result in needing to recharge on the next turn. However, a mechanic in Generation 1 was that if a Pokemon were to be KO'd by Hyper Beam, the recharge turn would be bypassed, allowing for Tauros to just come in late game and sweep entire teams. It's for this reason Tauros was widely run at level 55, since it needed to at least speed tie other Tauros and try to outrun as many Pokemon as possible, and of course the additional points in the attack stat meant it was much easier to pick up Hyper Beam KOs. Beyond that, Tauros would run staple moves like Blizzard and Earthquake for coverage options, and Body Slam if it needed to click a move other than Hyper Beam, assuming it couldn't get the KO that turn. But the funniest option it had was Horn Drill, an OHKO move which would instantly one-shot any Pokemon as long as it hit that 30% accuracy check. In Generation 1, OHKO moves don't affect Pokemon who are faster than the user, which is yet another reason it had to be run at level 55. Tauros could take on the likes of Alakazam, Gengar, and Exeggutor, who all saw high usage in this format, but its worst matchup was into Articuno, as its Blizzards could chunk Tauros for massive damage while threatening to freeze. It's for this reason some players would opt for Rock Slide Kangaskhan instead of Tauros, as Tauros didn't have any rock coverage, but Tauros is widely considered the best Pokemon in Nintendo Cup 1997, and thus the best Pokemon in Gen 1 for this video. And I should have mentioned this before, but obviously Mewtwo and Mew are banned. Mewtwo you catch at level 70, so it can't even be played in that format. This channel is partnered with GamerSupps. If you want to support my work and get great tasting drinks, you can order GamerSupps Gamersubs through my link in the description down below or with code Moxie boosted at checkout for 10% off. Gamersubs is a caffeinated product that I recommend only to my 18+ viewers, but my link will send you to their caffeine-free product section just in case. Every product purchased through my link supports my channel financially, so I'd really appreciate the support. Now back to the video. Apologies for how long the Toro section took, there was a lot of context to explain, but Snorlax in Generation 2 is a much simpler case. Nintendo Cup 2000 is just effectively Nintendo Cup 1997, but with the Generation 2 Pokédex. With Generation 2's release, a few major changes were made to the game, including the introduction of 2 new types in Dark and Steel type, and the splitting of the special stat into Special Attack and Special Defense. Many Pokemon suffered as a result of this, with them no longer being able to use their special stat to use moves like Thunderbolt or Ice Beam for effective coverage moves. But Snorlax actually benefited quite a bit from this change, where in Generation 1, Snorlax had a special stat of 65, mirroring its 65 defense stat, effectively meaning that its bulk on both the physical and special side were only passable due to its massive HP stat. In Generation 2, it ended up keeping the 65 special stat in the form of its special attack, but gained a huge 110 special defense stat. This effectively meant that Snorlax was capable of eating any special attack in the game while being able to bolster its physical attack and defense by using Curse and recovering its health back with Rest and its held item leftovers. At which point it can score massive damage with Double Edge, Body Slam, or Return as its main attacking move. The final move it would run would either be Earthquake to deal with Steel types and hit normal immune Ghost types, but it would also sometimes run Fire Blast as a way to deal with opposing Fortress, as Fortress would not only be able to switch in on Snorlax, but absolutely destroy it using Explosion, sacrificing itself to remove the strongest Pokemon in the opponent's team. This was particularly effective against Belly Drop Snorlax sets, as these Snorlax would already be sacrificing half their health initially to maximize their attack stats, leaving them more vulnerable to Explosion having their defense stats and getting the KO. The metagame practically revolved around Snorlax, with most Pokemon existing to either eliminate Snorlax or capitalize on the removal of it from the game, like Raikou or Zapdos, who would be walled out by Snorlax's massive special defense, but would be able to easily deal with the likes of Cloyster or Skarmory, who serve as checks to Snorlax. When a metagame revolves this much around one Pokemon, it's a pretty cut and dry case that that Pokemon is the best. Generation 2 obviously goes to Snorlax. I mean, the mechanics of the game just serve it well. You can maximize every stat that you want. It is a bulky format, and it is the bulkiest Pokemon that you can get. While Generation 3 may have finally introduced double battles and thus the bring 6 pick 4 format that we know in modern VGC, this is one of the least well documented eras of competitive Pokemon, at least for the official circuit. For that reason, I had to do some research alongside reaching out to some friends of mine, including my friend Andre, who competed around this time. He turns 100 years old this summer, so be sure to say happy birthday. And I even read up on this format on a couple of websites, such as the Or Coliseum website, which hosts an article written by Jason Noodle Segala. Also, I do want to let you guys know, I learned something really cool about Generation 3. They still host tournaments for Generation 3. In fact, there is a tournament going on for Generation 3 at Indianapolis Regionals this year. Like, Jason or whoever runs the website set up a tournament, and you can sign up for it still on their website. I'll give it a little shout out down below. Anyways, Pokemon Journey Across America was the tournament circuit, which ran in 2006. This format allowed for the use of a full team of 6 restricted legendary Pokemon, which at that time was just barely possible as there were only 6 restricted legendaries in the game: Mewtwo, Ho-Oh, Lugia, Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza. Due to this, obviously restricted legendaries ran the format, with the exception of Pokemon like Snorlax, Metagross, and Ludicolo, who were able to function in the format due to them countering certain legendary Pokemon and just having solid niches. This was the case for other Pokemon, but these were some of the more common non-legendaries you would see. But the king of the format was Mewtwo, who functioned as the single most versatile restricted legendary Pokemon in the game, due to its overall high stats, absurd speed tier for the format, and wide move pool, allowing it the coverage to deal with the likes of Lugia, Groudon, Rayquaza, and basically any relevant Pokemon in the game. There were very few Pokemon that Mewtwo was not able to hit for super effective damage. Mewtwo even had the option to run support moves like Reflect and Light Screen to lower the overall damage it would take on its team. And sometimes it would even tech the move Toxic on it to deal with some of the bulkier Pokemon in the format like Snorlax. The long and short of it is, Mewtwo could do basically anything you need it to regardless of what team it was on, leading to it being overrepresented in the format. Even Self-Destruct was an option that had to be respected on Mewtwo, as it was a closed team sheet environment. Mewtwo just takes Generation 3 and it isn't really close. Finally, in Generation 4, we end up in VGC territory, as the term VGC wasn't used until VGC 2009, which means that in 2008, we actually still called the format the Pokemon Video Game Showdown. With multiple formats to determine the best of the generation from, we won't be taking as deep of a look into the individual metagames from this point, and mostly just bullet point what made the Pokemon that I picked as the best Pokemon so strong across multiple formats. With that, of course, we're going with Metagross. Yeah, from this point on, we're probably not going to have any restricted Pokemon win the pick for these gens, as restricted Pokemon don't have as much of an opportunity to define the generation, as only really one of the years each generation allows for them to be used. Meanwhile, other Pokemon have 3 full years to be used. Metagross in Generation 4 had a lot of tools, which allowed for it to see success across multiple formats, even when restricted legendary Pokemon were introduced in 2010. Metagross's sky-high attack, incredible bulk, and excellent defensive typing allowed for it to not only be able to sponge hits from other threats in the game like Latios and Gyarados, which saw heavy usage, but even its typing was better back in Generation 4, as Steel still resisted Ghost-type attacks. This meant that Metagross is able to sponge Shadow Balls from the likes of Gengar or Mewtwo, or even Giratina, as rare as Giratina was. A typical Metagross moveset would run moves such as Meteor Mash, Bullet Punch, Earthquake, and Explosion as staple moves, allowing for it to use its Steel-type stab to deal chunks of damage to the likes of Snorlax in 2008, Rhyperior and Togekiss in 2009, and many restricted Pokemon in 2010. But across a few of these formats, Metagross is able to deal with opposing Heatran by using its coverage move Earthquake. And of course, Explosion was just a generally useful move in Generation 4 and prior. This was because Explosion still cut the defense of all targets in half as it dealt its damage, letting it be used to board wipe in a lot of situations. Just generally speaking, very few Pokemon had as consistent of a run as Metagross did back in Generation 4, leading it to being the workhorse Pokemon of all 3 formats of that generation. The absolute GOAT of Generation 5 VGC is without a doubt Thundurus. Thundurus was a Pokemon who not only had one of the best overall type combos in the game at that point in Electric Flying, but also exemplified the balance of support and offensive tools that would go on to define future VGC greats. Thundurus boasted a stat spread of 79 defense, 115 attack, 70 defense, 125 special attack, 80 special defense, and 111 speed. On face value, this is a menace of a dedicated special attacking Pokemon. And while a dedicated special attacking offensive Pokemon was the norm for Thundurus at the start of Generation 5, the version of Thundurus that would go on to define the generation was the bulky support Thundurus that ended up winning the 2011 World Championships in the hands of Ray Rizzo. This Thundurus would not only be able to threaten great damage off of Stab Thunderbolt, which at the time was still 95 base power instead of its current 90 base power, but it could also provide great speed control for the team by using Thunder Wave, permanently cutting the target Pokemon's speed stat to a quarter, allowing even the slowest of Pokemon to outspeed them. Not to mention the chance to fully paralyze a Pokemon, which was a 25% chance to occur. This Thundurus was not only an active threat on the battlefield, but was even difficult to KO, as it would often run a bold hyper defensive set with a Chardy Berry to tank rock slides and hits in general, letting it maximize the odds of its partner Pokemon winning by paralyzing, in some cases, the entire other team, as in Generation 5, even electric types could be paralyzed. Thundurus would go on to play this role in 2012 and 2013, sitting at the top of the viability rankings for every format, as it was so dominant that it would go on to receive a number of nerfs in Generation 6. As of Gen 6, Thunder Wave went from 100 accuracy to just 90, and speed would no longer be cut to 25%, but rather 50% when a Pokemon was paralyzed. Thundurus was the perfect blend of support and power, with it enabling its partner Terrakions, Tyrannitars, Landorus, and practically every other Pokemon in the game that would find itself next to Thundurus, while being also able to check the likes of Tornadus, Politoed, Kingdra, and even Scizor. Overall, Thundurus just kind of ruled the roost in Generation 5, and it's not even that close of a competition. Few Pokemon have ever defined a generation quite like Mega Kangaskhan, and while this may not have been the case for VGC 2014, or even most of VGC 2015, as the Chalk team, which defined the format's late metagame, wasn't really a thing until just before the World Championships, where it was like all of the top 8, by the way. It was due to this team that Mega Kangaskhan was able to leave a mark on the game so impactful that it ended up being seen as the face of VGC at the time, and even to an extent, everything wrong with the way Pokemon approached balance balancing their game. Mega Kangaskhan was powerful for a few reasons, including its overall bulk, its good speed tier, its access to fake out, and powerful stab double edge. But what truly put it over the top was its ability Parental Bond. This ability caused Mega Kangaskhan to have its single target moves hit twice, with the second move hitting for 50% of the damage of the initial move. While this originally allowed for Mega Kangaskhan to just bypass focus sashes and have sort of a built-in choice band in a way, what really broke it was access to the move Power Up Punch. This move was a 40 base power fighting type move that would always grant the user an attack boost. In the hands of Kangaskhan, not only was this a solid way of dealing chip damage against Pokemon like Heatran or opposing Kangaskhan, but it was also an offensive Swords Dance, as hitting twice meant that it would boost its attack stat twice. Picking up a KO against a Kangaskhan or Heatran with Power Up Punch, or just calling a defensive switch into another Pokemon only to Power Up Punch them, allowed for Mega Kangaskhan to instantly double its attack stat and become one of the most powerful attacking Pokemon in the game. It did heavily rely on the super optimized Chalk team in 2015 to see its full potential come out, but once the cat was out of the bag, Kangaskhan went on to be used on multiple archetypes, including the Big Six team in VGC 2016, which is widely considered the best team in the entire format. I don't know about you, but if being on two of the best teams in a format for 2 formats in a row isn't enough to call it the best of the generation, I don't know what is. And beyond that, Kangaskhan went on to be heavily nerfed in Generation 7, with its ability not only being nerfed to having the second hit only deal 25% of the initial hit, but it would also lose access to Power Punch altogether, which it didn't get access to in Pokemon Champions, as they know that that would be just a little bit too much for Mega Kangaskhan even today. As a matter of fact, if we really think about it, it's kind of getting better with time. Scrappy got buffed, Inner Focus got buffed, it's got both of those abilities. Yeah, Mega Kangaskhan is the best Pokemon in Generation 6. We all knew that Generation 7 would be Incineroar. Of course, Incineroar is the best Pokemon in Gen 7, and rather than doing a long, drawn-out explanation about everything that made Incineroar good for the 1000th time on this channel, I'll just give you the short Spark Notes version. Basically, the Fire Dark type is an excellent offensive and defensive type, and having access to Fake Out, U-Turn, Knockoff, and Flare Blitz as its most default moveset allowed for Incineroar to function on a wide variety of teams. It can not only play a supportive role, but deal huge damage to problematic bulky Pokemon such as Amoonguss and Cresselia with its Stab, Fire, and Dark moves. And while it took until midway through the second year of VGC for Gen 7 in the 2018 format for Incineroar to get its ability Intimidate, it went on to reshape the format altogether. It even held its own and was considered one of the best Pokemon in the 2019 restricted formats, where it was not only known for taking +2 Moonblast from Xerneas and using Roar to force it out afterwards in Sun Series, but it even ran its Incendium Z-Stone in Moon Series and Ultra Series to one-shot Lunala through its Shadow Shield ability. There's no real need to linger on Generation 7 any longer. Tapu Koko, Tapu Fini, and Snorlax all could have been the best Pokemon of the generation, but Intimidate, Fake Out, U-Turn, and all these different tools, Low Kick, all like the coverage that it had, all of the different ways of applying it made Incineroar the absolute best Pokemon in Generation 7. This one may shock you, but the best Pokemon of the Generation 8 formats was not Urshifu. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even a Generation 8 Pokemon, as power creepy as those ones were. To find the best Pokemon in Generation 8, we have to look back at Generation 1. Yep, the best Pokemon in Gen 8 is none other than Charizard, specifically its G-Max form. G-Max Charizard was a Pokemon that took the concept of balance and kind of just threw it out the window. G-Max Charizard had access to an exclusive G-Max move called G-Max Wildfire, a move which would deal absurd initial damage as it would use Blast Burn as its base move, and then pair it with a sun-setting Pokemon to power up its special attack with the ability Solar Power to most likely just score a one-hit KO on like the first turn of the game. At which point, G-Max Wildfire would set up a Sea of Flames on the opponent's side of the field, which would last for 4 turns, dealing 1/6 of the opponent's max HP in damage if they weren't a fire type. This is obviously ridiculous, as not only would Charizard usually take a KO on that first turn, but it would consistently be dealing chip damage to the other person's team, getting them in range of whatever Pokemon may be in the back, or maybe just Charizard itself on the next turn. Charizard was able to boost its speed with Max Airstream, and often ran a coverage move in the last slot to defend itself from its usual checks. This could be Solar Beam to remove the likes of Groudon, Gastrodon, and Kyogre, but it would also sometimes run Ancient Power to remove other Charizards from play. That's how great Charizard was, you needed your Charizard to check other Charizards on certain teams. Charizard won majors in every format it was legal in for all of Generation 8, and was even on the team that was considered the best of the VGC 2021 season, Rinya Sun, a team which would put Charizard behind screens set up by partner Grimmsnarl while taking advantage of Groudon's Sun and using both Groudon and Zacian to check opposing Gmax Pokemon that may give it issues like Colossal or opposing Groudon. Bulky Charizard would go on to be the standard, as it just became pretty undeniable that Charizard sat at the top of the generation, with it being able to take on restricted legendaries like Calyrex and Zacian. Charizard was just an absurdly powerful Pokemon this gen. Its speed boosting, its initial damage, and of course its broken Gmax move caused it to be on the best team in the format, with it not only winning the first major of the game before it even had access to solar power, but also winning a ton of tournaments at the end of the generation. For Generation 9, it was a little bit of a toss-up between Iron Hands, Urshifu, and Fluttermane, but ultimately I did settle on Fluttermane, and it's really not very close. The fact of the matter is, Fluttermane could do it all. From the start of Series 2 all the way to Regulation I at the end of the generation, Fluttermane was the Pokemon to look out for. As a Ghost Fairy-type, Fluttermane boasted a very good offensive matchup spread, which was only bolstered by its extremely min-max stats, with 55 in its HP, attack, and defense, and 135 in its special attack, special defense, and speed. Fluttermane was actually able to fill a wide variety of roles while remaining, in most situations, the single most dangerous Pokemon on the field. Fluttermane would, at the start, run a max speed, max special attack set with a Focus Sash and focus on dealing damage. But soon people realized that a supportive Fluttermane with lots of physical bulk and booster energy could not only easily grant speed control to its team, but also deal massive damage off of Terra Fairy Fairy-type moves. And of course, we even found that Fluttermane could play an all-out offensive set, with bulky choice spec sets becoming the norm for a little while in the middle of the generation. And yes, Specs Flutter could double down on its damage by clicking Terra Fairy and clicking Moonblast or Dazzling Gleam to deal absurd damage next to Chi-Yu, which would decrease the special defense of every Pokemon on the field. Certain Fluttermane were even able to tank hits from Chien-Pao and Urshifu, two of the strongest physical attackers in the game, despite it having such low defenses. And Fluttermane would become only more relevant once restricted Pokemon came into play, as it was not only a check to Miraidon and Koraidon, two of the best Pokemon in the game, but even Calyrex. Beyond this, it was also Koraidon's best partner. Its ability Photosynthesis could be used in Sun to boost its speed. Koraidon set up Sun. Because it was able to boost its speed through its ability without having to use the booster energy, it was able to hold a Focus Sash, meaning it was a fake-out immune ghost type with access to speed control and huge damage off its fairy moves. At this point, it could use Icy Wind and Thunder Wave to support the team and allow Koraidon a much easier time to score KOs, and also still pair very well with Chi-Yu, who also only got better in the Sun. From setting up Trick Rooms to scoring KOs, this Pokemon basically had everything, and it's not really a competition, it was the absolute best Pokemon in Generation 9. With that, we have Generation 1's best Pokemon being Tauros, Generation 2's best Pokemon being Snorlax, Generation 3's best Pokemon being Mewtwo, Generation 4's best Pokemon being Metagross, Generation 5's best Pokemon being Thundurus, Generation 6's best Pokemon being Mega Kangaskhan, Generation 7's best Pokemon being Incineroar, Gen 8's best Pokemon being Charizard, and Gen 9's best Pokemon being Fluttermane. But those were just my picks. What do you think were the best Pokemon of each generation, and did I miss anything huge? Let me know in the comment section below, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more competitive Pokemon content. If you want to support me even further, be sure to check out my Patreon page or become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button below. This will get you your name at the end of all of these videos, as well as access to my members only Discord, where we team build and host tournaments. Another way to support me is to check out the playlist on screen right now. I'm sure you'll find something in there that you'll enjoy, as all those videos are kind of like this video. I talk about competitive Pokemon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.